Courtroom was unnervingly quiet as the judge's gavel came down, echoing through the tense room. The defendant, face pale, shifted uncomfortably in their chair, eyes darting around, avoiding the gaze of their accuser. The air was thick with tension as whispers spread across the room like wildfire. It had all led to this moment, this revelation, where everything would change. The prosecutor stood, her hand shaking ever so slightly as she held up a file that could undo everything. The defendant's lawyer, trying to maintain his composure, exchanged a brief knowing look with his client. No one could predict what was coming next. Then the defendant stood, their voice breaking the silence. "I confess," they said, their words tumbling out like a chain that could never be unlinked. The room collectively gasped, the shock reverberating off the walls. This was no ordinary trial. The truth had always been lurking, just beneath the surface, ready to break free. And now, it was here, exposed in its rawest, most damning form. The confession still echoed in the air as the judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The defense lawyer's face betrayed no emotion, but his clenched jaw told a different story. The prosecutor took a slow breath, trying to steady herself while flipping through the file. The jury shifted in their seats, unsure of what to make of the sudden turn. From the back of the room, a woman in a dark coat rose, her gaze fixed on the defendant with an intensity that cut through the tension. Whispers flared again, rippling like waves across the gallery. The defendant's hands trembled, her knuckles pale against the polished wood of the podium. She knew there was no going back now. Every word she had just spoken had set fire to the carefully constructed walls around the truth. This wasn't just about guilt. It was about something far deeper. Something that had been buried for years, clawing its way into the light in front of everyone who mattered. The woman in the dark coat took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor, a sound that pierced the oppressive quiet. The bailiff moved instinctively, but the judge raised a hand, halting him. The stranger's voice was steady but sharp, cutting through the tension as she said, "You don't know the whole truth." Gasps filled the gallery again, and the prosecutor's brow furrowed, sensing an unexpected shift. The defendant's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. For a moment, no one breathed. Every person in the room could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. This was no interruption. It was an incursion into the very heart of the trial. The judge's gavel hovered in the air, ready, but uncertain whether to bring order or let the storm break. The judge finally broke the silence. "Identify yourself," he demanded, his voice steady but edged with caution. The woman in the coat tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into something between a smirk and a grimace. "I am the witness you never called," she said. Murmurs exploded among the spectators, and the prosecutor's hand froze on the page of her file. The defense lawyer's eyes darted to the defendant, whose breathing had become quick and shallow. The tension was now unbearable, like a taut wire ready to snap. The bailiff moved closer, awaiting orders. This was not in the script. This was chaos bleeding into the sanctity of the courtroom. And in that chaos the truth was clawing its way to the surface. The judge's gavel finally came down, hard and deliberate, restoring a fragile semblance of order. "This court will recess for 10 minutes, he declared, though his voice carried the weight of something more than procedure. The mysterious woman did not sit. Instead, she kept her eyes locked on the defendant, unblinking. The defendant's shoulders sagged, as if a lifetime of secrets had just been laid bare in a single gaze. The jury avoided looking at one another, each lost in thought, trying to piece together what had just unfolded. The prosecutor closed her file slowly, as though bracing for the storm that was now inevitable. This was only the beginning, and everyone in the room knew it. The real trial, the one no one would ever officially record, was about to begin. The recess had ended, but the air in the courtroom still felt like it carried the weight of that mysterious declaration. The judge's gaze swept the room as the bailiff instructed everyone to take their seats. The prosecutor's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed unease as she addressed the court. "We must establish this witness credibility." The defense lawyer shifted in his seat, glancing at his client, who avoided his gaze entirely. The mysterious woman sat silently, her hands folded neatly, as though she had been waiting years for this moment. The jury leaned forward, each person sensing the shift in the trial's trajectory. Outside, clouds gathered, and the sunlight that once lit the room had dimmed into an ominous gloom. The defendant's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew the worst was yet to come. The prosecutor began, her voice cutting through the silence. "State your name and occupation for the record." The woman's lips curved into a faint smile. "Elena Voss, former investigator." The defense lawyer's pen froze mid-note. The jury exchanged cautious glances. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing. Elena's tone was calm, but every word seemed to carry a weight that bent the atmosphere in the room. "I was part of the original inquiry, before it was buried." A murmur rippled through the spectators. The defendant's shoulders tightened, her fingers curling into her palms beneath the table. This wasn't just testimony. It was an opening to secrets no one had expected to hear. Elena leaned slightly forward. "I have evidence this court has not seen, records that were intentionally excluded." The defense lawyer was on his feet instantly. "Objection, speculation." The judge held up his hand. "Overruled. For now." The gallery erupted into whispers again. Elena's calm demeanor never wavered. "The truth," she continued, "was hidden to protect someone in this very room." The words seemed to freeze the air. All eyes turned instinctively toward the defendant, whose breathing grew ragged. The prosecutor's pen stopped mid-scribble, her mind already racing through the possibilities. This was no longer about winning a case. It was about surviving the fallout. The prosecutor approached the stand slowly. "Ms. Voss, these are serious claims. Do you have proof?" Elena's eyes never left the defendant. "More than enough," she replied, her voice like steel. The defendant shook her head, muttering under her breath, "She's lying." The defense lawyer placed a hand on his client's shoulder, but it did little to calm her. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Proceed," he said, though his tone was lined with caution. Elena reached into a worn leather folder beside her, the paper inside yellowed with age. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, as if bracing for impact. Elena placed the first page on the stand. "This," she said, "is the original witness statement, the one removed from the official file." The prosecutor's eyes widened as she scanned the page, her lips pressing together in disbelief. The defense lawyer reached out, demanding to see it, but the judge's gavel struck once, sharply. "Counsel will wait." The jury craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse. The defendant's face drained of color, her eyes fixed on the page, as if it were a weapon aimed directly at her. Whatever fragile defense she had maintained was beginning to crumble under the weight of history resurfacing in full view. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing as he scanned the document. The prosecutor leaned forward, voice steady but urgent. "Ms. Voss, can you explain why the statement was removed from the record?" Elena's gaze flicked briefly to the defendant before returning to the prosecutor. "Because it implicated someone with power. Someone who ensured the truth never saw daylight." The defense lawyer rose quickly. "Your Honor, this is reckless speculation." But the judge's gavel struck once, silencing him. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the fragile veneer of order was cracking. The defendant's eyes were locked on the desk before her, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. The room was no longer just a courtroom, it was a battlefield. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Who was protected, Ms. Voss?" The silence stretched long enough for the air to feel heavy. Elena's voice was low but sharp. "A sitting official. And I have proof." The defense lawyer slammed his pen down. "This is absurd." The defendant finally looked up, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The jury exchanged uneasy glances, each silently questioning the system they were supposed to trust. The judge's hands gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles whitening. In that moment, it was clear that this trial was no longer about the crime, it was about the rot beneath the surface. The judge cleared his throat. Meh. Voss, you understand the gravity of this claim. She nodded once. Which is why I kept everything. She reached into her folder, withdrawing a sealed envelope. The prosecutor's brow furrowed as she took it, her eyes scanning the first lines before tightening in shock. The defense lawyer stood rigid, as though bracing for a blow. The defendant's breathing became shallow, every rise and fall of her chest visible from across the room. Outside, rain began to patter against the tall windows, the sound mingling with the tension inside. The truth was no longer creeping forward, it was breaking through the walls. The prosecutor turned to the judge. This changes everything. The judge's expression hardened. Then present it. The defense lawyer stepped forward. Your Honor, I demand to review the document before it's entered into evidence. The judge hesitated, weighing the tension in the room. Elena's gaze remained fixed on the defendant, whose hands were now clasped tightly together on the table. The jury shifted again, their focus moving between the lawyers, like spectators at a match. Every passing second deepened the fracture between law and truth. The judge finally spoke. Both counsel will review the document in my chambers. Court is in recess. The gavel's crack was sharp, but no one moved immediately. The defendant exhaled slowly, as if trying to steady herself. Elena stood, her coat shifting slightly with the motion, eyes never leaving the defense table. The prosecutor gathered her files quickly, her movements precise but charged. The defense lawyer placed a hand on his client's arm before leading her toward the judge's chambers. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking the windows like tears the room refused to shed. This was no longer a trial. It was a countdown. In the judge's chambers, the air was thick with the smell of old wood and ink. The prosecutor spread the document open on the polished desk. The defense lawyer leaned over, eyes scanning quickly. His jaw clenched. Where did you get this? The judge's gaze moved between them, silent but alert. The defendant sat stiffly in a corner chair, her eyes fixed on the floor. The pages revealed names, one in particular, circled in red, that made the prosecutor's stomach tighten. It was someone who should never have been connected to this case. Outside, the rain's patter intensified, a rhythmic drumbeat to the unraveling of control. The silence inside was dangerous, ready to break. The prosecutor's voice was almost a whisper. This can't be real. The defense lawyer shot back. It's fabricated. It has to be. The judge's tone was low and steady. It will be verified. The defendant finally spoke, her voice hoarse. It's not fake, but you don't understand. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. Then, explain. The defendant's lips trembled as she inhaled sharply. If I tell you I'm as good as dead. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second marking the weight of the unspoken. No one in the room trusted the others anymore, not fully, not even a little. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Voss will be recalled to the stand. The court must hear this. The defense lawyer's eyes flashed with frustration. Your Honor, this is trial by ambush. The prosecutor, without looking at him, gathered the papers. The defendant's voice cut through, softer now. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Her gaze flicked toward the rain-smeared window. Outside, a black sedan pulled up to the curb, headlights cutting through the mist. The judge noticed, his expression darkening, but said nothing. The room had shifted. Something far larger than this trial was now in motion. Back in the courtroom, Elena Voss was once again in the witness stand, her eyes tracking the defendant as she was led back in. The spectators whispered, but the tension was different now, heavier, as though they could all sense the invisible line being crossed. The prosecutor's questions were sharper this time. Ms. Voss, tell the court exactly who ordered the suppression of your evidence. Elena glanced at the defendant, then at the jury, before speaking. A government official, who is still in office. Gasps broke from the gallery. The defense lawyer slammed his hand on the table. Enough. This is political theater. But the damage was done. The judge's gavel thundered, restoring a brittle order. We will recess for security review. Elena remained seated, her gaze unwavering, while the defendant's eyes darted toward the courtroom doors. Two suited men entered from the back, scanning the room with professional detachment. The jury whispered among themselves, unease growing. The prosecutor watched the suited men closely, her hand tightening on the edge of the counsel's table. The defense lawyer leaned toward his client, murmuring something only she could hear. The rain outside had become a downpour, each drop hammering against the glass like a countdown neither side could stop. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was brittle, as if one word could shatter it completely. The two suited men remained at the back, their eyes scanning every movement. The prosecutor stepped forward, holding the damning document. "Nos, please confirm, did you obtain this during your time as an investigator?" Elena's voice was steady. "Yes, and it was hidden to protect an official, now sitting in this room." The gallery erupted. The defense lawyer shot up. "Name them, and this trial collapses into chaos." The judge's gavel hammered, but control was slipping. The defendant's face turned ashen, her eyes darting between the prosecutor and Elena, like someone trapped in a burning room. The prosecutor didn't blink. "Ans Voss, name the person responsible." Elena's gaze swept the room, stopping on the defense table. "Judge Raymond Holt." The words landed like a physical blow. Gasps, then silence. The judge's eyes froze, his grip on the gavel tightening until his knuckles whitened. "You are out of line," he said, but his voice was quieter than before. The defense lawyer looked stunned, his jaw working silently. The defendant's lips curled into the faintest trace of something between vindication and fear. For the first time, the power in the room shifted completely. The judge's gavel slammed down so hard it echoed off the walls. "This is contempt. Remove her from the stand." The suited men moved forward, but the prosecutor raised her voice. "This is sworn testimony, and it will be entered into the record." The defense lawyer stepped back, unsure if defending his client was even possible anymore. Elena didn't flinch as the men approached. "You can silence me, but the evidence exists beyond this courtroom." The jury sat frozen, caught between shock and a dawning realization that they were part of something far bigger than the verdict they'd been brought here to decide. The judge ordered a recess, but no one moved quickly. The prosecutor gathered the documents into a leather folder, her hands precise, almost ceremonial. The defense lawyer pulled the defendant aside, whispering urgently. Elena was escorted out, her head held high, her eyes scanning the gallery as though memorizing every face. The jury exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions a mirror of the chaos in the room. Outside, thunder rolled, shaking the glass. Inside, the tension no longer needed words, it was a living, breathing presence, pressing against everyone. As Elena disappeared from sight, the prosecutor turned to the defense table. "Your Honor, I will be filing an emergency motion to protect this witness." The judge's stare was unreadable. "We will proceed as scheduled." The defendant's eyes narrowed, as if realizing her own survival now depended on unpredictable forces. The jury remained silent, every one of them aware they were witnessing the collapse of the trial's integrity. Outside, the rain hammered relentlessly, drowning out the last murmurs in the room. This was no longer a legal battle. It was survival, and not everyone would make it to the end. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the tension inside the courthouse was unbroken. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the prosecutor leaned against the wall, flipping through the copies of Elena's statement. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that this case had spiraled beyond legal boundaries. The defense lawyer stood several feet away, speaking quietly to the defendant, his voice low and urgent. Elena was nowhere in sight, escorted through a side exit for security reasons. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, measured, deliberate. Everyone knew the verdict was still hours away, but the real judgment was already forming in the minds of those who had seen too much. Back inside, the jury sat in the deliberation room, their voices hushed but tense. Some stared at the table, others at the ceiling, as if looking anywhere but at each other. The foreman, a man in his early 50s, tapped a pen against the wood, a steady beat that grated on frayed nerves. "We have to decide," he said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. A woman at the end of the table whispered, "Decide on what? The law or the truth?" The rain's faint patter against the windows was the only other sound, a metronome to the weight of indecision. In a small conference room nearby, the prosecutor met with two plainclothes investigators. "If the judge's name is in those files, this trial is compromised," one said. She nodded, her eyes scanning their notes. "We can't pull it now. It'll look like retaliation." The other investigator leaned forward. "Then we protect the witness and let the jury do their job." The prosecutor glanced at the door, lowering her voice. "That's assuming they're allowed to." The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, the sound somehow louder than the whisper of their conversation. The defendant sat alone in a holding room, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. Her lawyer had stepped out to make a call, leaving her with the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. She stared at the tabletop, tracing the scratches in the wood as if they might tell her future. Outside the small window, the rain was now a light mist. She whispered something to herself, too soft for anyone to hear. Whatever came next, she knew the truth was no longer fully hers to control. In the judge's chambers, Raymond Holt stood at the window, watching the rain bead and slide down the glass. His gavel rested on the desk, untouched. The door opened quietly, and one of the suited men stepped inside. "We'll take care of it," he said simply. The judge didn't turn. "Make sure no one can tie it back here." The man nodded once, and left as silently as he came. Holt's reflection in the window looked older, more tired, but there was no regret in his eyes, only calculation. Somewhere deep in the courthouse, the jury continued to deliberate, unaware of the decisions already being made above them. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their expressions unreadable. Every seat in the gallery was filled, the air charged with anticipation. The prosecutor stood rigid, her hands clasped in front of her. The defense lawyer rested a hand on the defendant's shoulder, more for show than comfort. The judge's eyes scanned the jurors as they took their places. The foreman held a folded paper, his fingers tight around it. Elena was absent, her chair at the witness stand empty and still. Somewhere in the building, rainwater dripped steadily into a metal pan, the sound faint but constant, a quiet metronome marking the seconds before history was made. The judge's voice was measured. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman nodded once. "We have, Your Honor." The bailiff took the folded paper and handed it to the judge, who unfolded it slowly. The silence was absolute, save for the faint hum of the overhead lights. The judge's eyes scanned the words, and for a split second, something unreadable passed across his face. He cleared his throat. "On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice." He paused, letting the weight of the moment stretch. "Guilty." The room erupted, the sound breaking like a wave. The prosecutor exhaled slowly, relief and caution mixing in her eyes. The defense lawyer's hand slipped from his client's shoulder. The defendant's lips parted, but no words came. The gallery buzzed with shock, some people leaning forward as if afraid they might miss what came next. The judge's gavel struck once for order, but the tension didn't ease. The prosecutor glanced toward the empty witness stand, her jaw tightening. Elena had delivered the truth, but at what cost? Somewhere beyond those courtroom walls, someone was already deciding whether that truth would live to see tomorrow. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective. A black sedan waited at the curb, engine idling. Elena sat in the back seat, her gaze fixed forward, unreadable. The suited man in the passenger seat glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. The driver pulled away slowly, the courthouse shrinking in the distance. Inside, the applause and outrage would rage for hours, but out here the silence was absolute. Elena knew she was leaving more than a trial behind. She was leaving the safety of the shadows forever. Back inside, the judge remained on the bench long after the room had cleared. The gavel sat beside him, untouched. His eyes stared at nothing, the verdict ringing in his ears like a bell that would never stop. He reached into his robe and withdrew a folded piece of paper, the same kind that had just condemned the defendant. On it, a single name was written, his own. He folded it again, and slipped it back into his pocket. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear, but inside, the darkness had only just begun.